Repair the world. Amanda, I should have had the rabbi say, repair the world. It was 3 a.m. when I sent the text to my client who lives on the other side of the world and told him that his story was now speaking to me in my dreamscape. And as I waited for his response, I thought about this dream and this line that we had missed and where it belonged. I realized, oh, it was the chapter that we just finished. So, like so many mornings before, I hustled to make my hot drink and I got to work. Yes, at 3 o'clock in the morning. This is the way it had been for about 6 months. I was hustling to keep up with this man. He was writing 10 good pages every day. And if you haven't written a book yourself, you got to know that's amazing, especially against the backdrop of owning a few businesses and having two small children at home. Oh, and moving across the world. And so I watched, amazed, as an 800-page outline turned into 1,500 pages of a story that I just knew was going to leave me changed forever. I just didn't know how. I was deeply immersed in the story. Beautiful story, remarkable characters, deeply conflicted inner worlds that were crashing into mine. And so a few weeks later, he sent me the chapter, the make or break chapter. This is the one that if we got it right, everything was great from there on out. If we got it wrong, we could lose the whole thread. And it didn't make the cut. So I sent him my notes and he said, you know what? Things are crazy right now. I'm getting ready to move. I won't be able to look for a week. If you want to add your Amanda magic to it, you go right ahead. I'll be back in a week. I thought, I don't know if I can do this scene justice, but something inside me compelled me to try. And so I began doing what I had been doing the whole time, inserting more visual details to make the scene more powerful. And as I got to the most powerful moment in the scene, adding details around the micro expressions and the characters and the stolen glances between them and the internal dialogue of the main character, time began to slow down. And not just that kind of time stop that we experience when we're watching a great movie or reading a great book. No, time slowed down inside of me. And all of a sudden, I was no longer a writing partner. I was a character. Actually, I was all the characters. I was the father, desperate to protect what he loved the most. I was the mother, powerless on the sidelines to do anything to help. And I was the child, trusting and wounded. Oh my God. I realized that this story, this scene that I was immersed in, looked almost exactly like one from my own childhood, where I was the child sitting at the breakfast table, trusting and now wounded. I was the grandmother, so powerless and furious that she was shaking. I was the father who, oh my God, I nearly shrieked as the possibility struck me. Is it possible that I've had this story wrong all along? That I thought he was doing one thing, but this was actually what he thought would protect me? The mere possibility that I'd had this all wrong for more than 3 decades, that who I thought I was as a result of that moment and who I became and the decisions that I made as a result of all of that could be wrong, started a crack inside of me. And when I finally got my breath back, I crawled into bed, texted everyone who needed to know that I would be out for the day, and started to cry. His story had opened a portal of healing for me at a depth that I had never experienced before. But I knew exactly what was happening. You see, story was saving me again as it had since long before I knew it had the capacity to do that. Story started to reveal its salvific properties to me when I was in my late teens at the university, when that question, but what if it's not true, threatened to shatter my entire worldview and made me feel things that I had no idea what to do with or even call. Enter The Matrix and The Lord of the Rings. Neo assured me those hard questions are necessary. It's harder to live in reality at first, but it's better than not. And no one, not even an oracle, can tell you who you are. You have to see it and own it for yourself. And then Frodo gave me someone to point to and say, that's how I'm feeling. What would you call that? And what is this heavy burden that I'm carrying? Story became a language and an opportunity for my best friend and I to do and develop what we would later learn was emotional literacy, to begin putting words, naming the feelings, feeling the feelings, and eventually being able to process those feelings that had been suppressed since moments like the one in my childhood. And then when I left college, I was pregnant, and I had no idea that story was about to make itself the ultimate invitation for a deep connection with my son and the opportunity to unfold potential in a tiny little human and his mommy. You see, having lost my religious footing, I was really trying to figure out how to raise a healthy, happy, resilient, responsible, moral human without the dogma. I used everything that I learned at the university and education classes and psychology and the great classics to develop really powerful messaging and healthier interactions. But what I was really worried about was protecting his mind and his heart from other people's stories until he was old enough and capable of thinking and choosing for himself. And so, even though we made the requests, our family members, some of them just had a hard time honoring our request to not evangelize. And so one day he came home from one of their houses and said, "Mom, why don't we have a Bible?" And before I could lose my temper at the dining room table, my husband interjected and said, "We do. It's Avatar, The Last Airbender." Yes, the Nickelodeon cartoon. And I thought, oh my God, you're a genius. I have just spent 4.5 years learning how to wrestle with great stories and the themes and universal truths embedded inside of them. And so our living room became a classroom where every night almost I sought to develop critical thinking and emotional literacy and moral character. It was an experiment, but when he was about 17, I realized it had worked. I was driving him home from school one day, and, unlike most days, he answered the question, "How was your day?" and told me that his science teacher had proposed that he might be able to choose immortality by the time he was my age. And so, after a lively but very fast debate, he said, "Mom, all of these other factors don't matter. What have we learned about time from all of our stories? If it's infinite, it almost doesn't matter. We have more meaning and connection when we know that the time is finite." Yes, story had truly proven to be an invitation to a very deep relationship with my son and also to myself as we mindfully walked millions of miles in character shoes and learned hard lessons in their stories before we had to learn them in our own. And eventually, story became the medicine that I needed to heal. In 2007, I was inspired with my own message. Everything that I had learned, everything that I had experimented with Aaron, I thought, I'm going to share this with the world. I'm going to change the world with these profound insights and ideas and steps and tools and lessons. And magic started to happen in my life. And I found myself inside of a community when the magic came screeching to a halt because they asked me, why did it matter to me? And suddenly I was confronted with the painful stories, not sure whether I should tell them or not. I chose to try. And as the pain poured out through my stories, and I realized that I was receiving compassion instead of judgment, I knew for the first time that telling our stories in sacred spaces can help us to heal. It's medicine, and I needed it. 2 years later, it was time for me to start helping messengers from the very beginning. And story proved very valuable again. In fact, it was the answer to all of the questions that we needed to answer together. Why do you care about this story? Well, once upon a time, my life was a hot mess because I didn't have these messages, these lessons, these tools, these insights. And I like to give someone else a shortcut. Well, who would that be? Perhaps it's that character that you were 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. And then how are you going to get them from where they are now to where you know you can take them? Well, what if you told your story and showed them all of the steps and missteps so that they could develop a little shortcut to their happily ever after? But how are you going to get them engaged and keep them engaged? Well, if you want to take someone on a hero's journey, you got to tell them you know where they're starting. No, you can't just tell them, you have to show them. You have to make them see and hear and feel that you know exactly where they're at and how to get them where they want to go. And maybe the hardest question of all, why haven't you written the book or the talk or the program? Is it because of the story? You don't really want to tell it. You don't really want to feel that again. And you certainly don't want anyone else to feel that way either. It was at the first retreat that I held when the first person fell into a heap of tears after telling her story that I realized I was not alone. And everyone eventually who crossed my path with the dream of changing the world, they realized eventually that the medicine was for them first. They had to turn the message on themselves first before they could share it with the world. There was the wildly successful entrepreneur who had somehow overcome a whole bunch of limits that were instilled in her by her dad. So successful, she was sure she would write the book in 7 days. Well, it took her 30. And by the end of the 30, what we knew was that she'd overcome a lot of limits, but she needed that healing moment with her dad that she got while writing the book. Then there was the social worker who decided to make custody evaluation more exciting. She was going to make a choose your own adventure, a fiction, or so she thought. By the end of the manuscript, she realized that she'd written her own story, and it was time to close the chapter on a toxic marriage and a generational narrative for her children and start a whole new chapter of her life. What about the clinical therapist who was writing not a novel and said, Amanda, I really cannot see how this could possibly be connected to my own story? Okay. And yet I wondered as I watched her wipe sweat from her brow and hold her sour stomach while she wrote the most pivotal scene in the whole novel. And then 2 weeks later, I laughed when she called to say that her character apparently was not the only one processing an ancient family secret that had wreaked havoc on the mental health of their family system. And then there was the hospice nurse, the one who spends so much of her time helping other people navigate grief, and yet couldn't write her own book about her daughter coming back from an incredibly horrible brain injury, miraculously coming back because she hadn't processed more than a decade of her own mama grief. Repair the world. This phrase continues to haunt my dreams and my waking life. It's what we're all called to, isn't it? Don't we all say we want to change the world and leave it better than we found it? What if story really is the answer? The language, the invitation, the medicine, just waiting for us to pay attention. What if it's by mindfully engaging it and writing it and witnessing it that we'll actually be able to repair first ourselves and then the world? Thank you.